Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about The Holdovers. Holdovers feels like, as many people have said, the kind of movie we used to see nominated for Oscars, or what used to be a big drama, a big hyped up drama of the time. And it reminds me of like 70s stuff and stuff like that. I actually ended up watching it with my mom, kind of like seated on the couch like we used to watch like all the Oscar movies when I was like young into movie stuff in the 90s and stuff, and it was very much a kind of throwback, a kind of very nostalgic viewing for me. But it also felt different because this is an Alexander Payne film. I would say this doesn't feel like Alexander Payne, but also feels like the ultimate Alexander Payne, like the movie we all thought he would reach at some point, but also like not as kind of weird as sometimes he gets to me. And it felt honestly like he was channeling more Hal Ashby than he ever has. If you'd asked me for this, I was like, do you think Hal Ashby's an influence on Alexander Payne? I probably would have been like, I mean, probably, most likely. And it essentially looks like he made a Hal Ashby movie, and that's really interesting. But I also think this movie really works as a very kind of comforting, nice, like slice of life drama that I was so used to when I started getting into movies, and so used to being part of the Oscar thing and stuff. And even though it isn't now, it kind of took me back to how kind of like comforting and smart those films could be, and this is, but also what those films really kind of said about the human condition and what they say about us as humans and everything like that, and but also how great they are to sort of like watch and sort of both see yourself in and understanding kind of humanity and these characters, in a sense, as big as that might sound. The Holdovers is about a teacher played by Paul Giamatti must watch a bunch of kids at this big prestigious private school who have not been sent home for Christmas for various reasons, and they're called the Holdovers, and he's going to watch them, and he is forced to watch these kids, and most of them actually end up leaving because this one parent comes and picks up their kid and picks up all the other kids in a helicopter, but leaves this one kid, Angus, who's kind of a smart mouth, very intelligent teenager, and they're also there with a cook called Mary, who works in the cafeteria there, whose son had just died in Vietnam, as this takes place in 1970. I should have said that earlier. And they're sort of there over the Christmas holiday, sort of bonding, learning about life, sort of bonding over that time. I think what's interesting about this film is it's so kind of small in terms of the characters and what it's trying to take on and the stakes and all that. But that's sort of like what remind me of things like, I kept thinking of The Last Detail, and I read people bring up Hal Ashby, and I sort of was like, oh yeah, I guess reminds me of like particularly not Giamatti, but particularly Dominic Sessa, like with Harold and Maude and stuff like that. And what those films, I think, when we think of them, are very like real and like what they say about us as humans and stuff. But what is the big kind of moment is like just remembering, maybe this isn't the biggest moment in any of their lives, but it is a moment for change or a moment of understanding who they're going to be and stuff. And I was used to like those movies. I think some can be a little too asking for the big moment. I don't think this is, although I do think what was interesting, I watched this with my mom, and this is 1970, and there is a major plot point to this that they kind of don't bring up as much, and I think if this was a film actually filmed in 1970 they would, which is they do bring up the Vietnam War with Divine Joy Randolph's character of Mary, and her son had died in Vietnam, and this is sort of her first Christmas without him, and she wants to stay at the school because that's sort of what they had together. But the idea that like if the character of Angus gets like kicked out or whatever because they're rich kids, they don't have to go to Vietnam in this like sort of prestigious boarding school, but if he were to be kicked out, that sort of would make him far more eligible for Vietnam. So that they don't bring that up as much. I think the film sort of assumes you know that. I heard it referred to sort of, but like when my mom brought it up, I was like, that wasn't as big of a thing. And I know, talking to anyone who grew up around then, they do bring it up a lot. So that part I think is more hinted at, and like everyone sort of knew. I don't know if everyone knows that as much. Maybe I'm making too big of a deal out of it because I thought it was an interesting observation. But I do think when you're growing up, and I think you kind of have this moment with a teacher or an adult, or you're just stuck with someone and you kind of just grow and bond. Those moments are sort of important and interesting and thought-provoking. And that's one thing I really like about this. But I also like that it's excellently acted. The writing's very perfect. This was not, well, it was sort of, Alexander Payne had the idea and David Hemmingson wrote it and is the credited screenwriter. But to my understanding, Alexander Payne came up, had the basic idea and asked him to write it, is my understanding from what I read. But I think it is a very pitch perfect script because it just does feel like this is that time, and you don't question it, and it does have like sort of catharsis. But also I think most of it, I don't know, in some ways it felt like Alexander Payne, like with the things at the beginning, like with the Universal logo and trying to make it look like the 70s, even though focus features didn't exist, they made him a cute little 70s logo, that was a little funny. This is sort of like him, like what a Tarantino would make a Grindhouse, Alexander Payne makes this instead. It did feel like throwing back to that, but it almost says more, think about the Kodak times then, but almost like sort of more universal. It's like very specific, which everyone says is the most universal way, I guess. But it felt very comforting in a way, just to see these people live out their lives in a certain degree. But I also, I don't know, I quite enjoyed it actually, and it's kind of sitting with me. Part of me thinks I should have let it sit with me more before filming this. Maybe that was a mistake, I don't know. Well, we'll see how I feel about this, or if I cut this part out, you'll also see. Paul Giamatti was great. It's nice seeing him back with Alexander Payne. He just had the perfect thing where he was just, you'd think he would be, he's not too crotchety and angry. My mom and my wife kept saying the eye thing would switch. I don't know. That's what they say. I'm going to go with that. You could tell he lived a life and had other interests out of it and really believed in things. But his anger, when you understand that, like why he's kind of this crotchety teacher who's taking care of it, you understand his kind of point of view, I guess. Giamatti like plays that throughout the whole film. But there's something about Giamatti I've always like sort of liked. He's like a great character actor, but anytime he gets to really do a lead, he's very subtle, but like knows exactly how to play it in an empathetic way, which I think a lot of actors just try to naturalize in a sense, but he feels like is thinking about, but it's projected in such a natural way. It feels like everyone else is working on their naturalism, but it feels like he is kind of thinking it out and planning it out in a way that's like very smart. It's very different seeing a character actor like him do it. As well as Divine Joy Randolph is excellent as the kind of cook who's like dealing with a lot of issues with the death of her son and stuff, but she also like does very subtle things with like eyebrow raise, or like just being like the person they go to watch the Newlywed Game with, or like something like that. Like she feels like someone who at first you'd be like, oh, she's the lunch lady, she's a little salty or something, and then she becomes like your friend just from like hanging out with her. It felt like someone you would become friends with at work who had like a pretty horrible thing happen to her. And obviously Dominic Sessa, I think feels straight out of the 70s, feels like an amazing film debut, one of the best I've seen in a long time, and that he can go toe to toe with two actors who have pretty great filmographies and have great careers and stuff, and be one-on-one with each of them, I think is like amazing. It's also like, this is a very silly thing, but in the opening credits I saw Tate Donovan was in this, and like the whole movie, it like, I don't know why it bugged me, but anytime someone would show up, I'm like, is that Tate Donovan? And I don't really like him that much or anything. I have nothing against this guy, but like it was like, and he doesn't show up till like that. So like the whole movie I'm like, is that, oh no, it's not Tate Donovan. Okay, cool, we're cool. It's like they go into a box at one point, like, is this gonna be Tate Donovan? Nope, not Tate Donovan. Is that gonna be Tate Donovan? Nope, sorry. Okay, just to be clear about it, one of the things about Alexander Payne is I expect him to be a little more sort of saltier than I expect from this. Maybe like, it's been a while since I've seen Nebraska. I didn't bother with downsizing, but my understanding that was a smart move. But the ones I remember of his, particularly like About Schmidt and Sideways and Election, felt like he would get a little stranger and a little like do some weirder stuff and everything. And this felt like almost like he was being very straight with it and like trying to adhere to this tone, the 70s stuff and everything. He just didn't feel as weird, like he didn't want to go into his like indie oddness in this in a sense. I don't think that would have worked for the movie, and I think that tone wise it worked well, but it's interesting because like I think of things like when he's like George Clooney's in The Descendants and he's like sees Matthew Lillard and he's making funny faces, like there's nothing specifically like that. Maybe because, you know, Paul Giamatti's weird eye thing like was wrapped up in what the film was, and like all those things sort of work within what they're doing. And like they like, maybe they're not as standoutish as like you see weird things in elections and stuff like that, but it just felt to me, I was watching it, like, this feels like Alexander Payne's like cooled and like sort of matured in a sense, and like in the right way. This is a movie I do feel, when we look at his filmography, and I'm filming this before nominations come out. I think it'll come out after nominations come out probably, but it feels like it's going to be one of his big movies. It feels like it's going to be like Election, obviously his biggest, Sideways, About Schmidt sort of gets forgotten, unfortunately, but like, it feels like this will be with those. I don't think Nebraska, I remember liking Nebraska or liking The Descendants. I don't think about them that much. I think I'm going to think about this one more, and it kind of has stayed with me. I do sort of want to ruminate on it more, marinate on it more, and hopefully not regret I filmed this too early or something. But I do think it like has some smart ideas within, you know, capturing that kind of time, and like the idea of just like staying over the holidays, and like the Angus character just sort of getting left there, and like how he's learning with the teacher. And like, I had one-on-one relationships with teachers, and you can really like learn things about them and learn more things about your subject and stuff like that. And it felt like you were kind of like growing up and understanding them more, but it also felt like your life experience with that and everything. And I don't know, it reminded me of those times. It reminded me of like kind of growing up and being in high school, and like the kind of like, I don't know, just like hanging out at school and understanding and like hanging out with adults, and like, but still being a smart alecky crazy kid. And like, and it reminded me of Hal Ashby, and like the how relatable and strange and odd those kind of human dramas kind of felt. And like, it feels like the Hal Ashby that everyone sort of like says they're trying to get to and never really do. It just felt very like kind of oddly warm and perfect in a lot of ways. I saw this on a cold night, and we're all hanging out on the couch and having blankets and stuff, and it felt like perfect. It feels like a perfect little moment in this film. And I don't think I took away the same things like the internet necessarily does, where like, it's just when Paul Giamatti looks disappointed. I didn't think it was the most devastating thing. I thought there's a lot of acting in this that isn't dialogue. It is them being like very natural. It's Giamatti or Divine Joy Randolph, but it just to me felt like oh, that was, you know, a crush you had at that time, and then you moved past it. And that was I think maybe if I had watched this when I was younger, I would have believed in my own ego or lack of life experience that this was a seminal time. And when the Angus character gets older, he'll always think back on it and stuff. And now that I'm probably closer to Paul Giamatti's age than Dominic Sessa, I think it's just like, this was a moment in time. This was that one holiday of many holidays, and it was important, and it was different, and it was impactful, and you did learn things from it, but it's one of many. And is that all of life, or the biggest moment of your life? Not necessarily, but it was a point that drove you to where you were. And much like how when this film ends up and where people go, it was a part of that, but it's not this like, you know, big impactful like, and that's how I am who I am today. It just helped everyone get on their path. And I think it is a film that feels like very cynical about the world, the way the characters are and like the world they're in, but is actually very optimistic and positive about ultimately what we can do. And I think that is like what we sort of like about these dramas. Maybe this is actually more Goodbye Mr. Chips than it actually is Hal Ashby, but in a sense I think that's the interesting thing about it, because like most Hollywood auteurs most directors would go to the kind of sentimental quality to it. And I think the way Alexander Payne plays this film, which is very smart actually, is that this is just like a moment in 1970, which this film doesn't make clear to the New Year's scene. We're like, oh, that's what it is. Because we're like, oh, 68, 9, 70 something. I don't know. Where are we going with this? It's a nice, comforting, wonderful little slice of life movie that I think understands the importance of that time and hoping the optimism of what happens after. And I think that's kind of something we all hope when we move on from something, is the optimism that this is just one of them. We move on, and hopefully, you know, even this holdover Christmas, there'll be brighter and more wonderful Christmases to come, and that we all sort of hopefully move on from it and things will work out better next time. Or at least that's what we hope, but you kind of just go into life hoping that things will work out for the better. So if you've seen The Holdovers and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.